This stretch of beach on the south coast of England, known as the Crumbles, was the location of two horrific murders in the 1920s. The Munro family, who lived in London, had a tradition every summer of visiting family in Scotland. However, August 1920, 17-year-old Irene Munro decided that she wanted to take a vacation alone to the seaside. Her mother agreed and helped her daughter plan her solo trip. In the evening on the 16th of August, Irene arrived at her lodgings on the south coast and wrote to her mother to let her know that she had arrived safely. The landlady who owned the holiday cottages, named Ada, described Irene as cheerful and polite. In the morning, Irene decided to explore the local area and headed down to the beach, where she was spotted by a young naval worker, William Putland. He noticed her because she was wearing a vivid bright green coat. After just 2 days of her holiday, Irene's mood began to change. Ada, the landlady, said that she seemed troubled. Irene said to Ada that my mother wanted me to go to Scotland with her. I should have gone. I wish I'd gone now. Something was concerning and upsetting this young girl, but what? In the afternoon on the 19th of August, Irene returned to her cottage after lunch. She grabbed her bright green coat and left. She never returned back to the cottage. Initially, the landlady Ada believed that perhaps Irene had gone to visit family, but as the days rolled by, she became more and more concerned. 24 hours after Irene had left the cottage, a mother and her 13-year-old son are walking along the beach, known as the Crumbles. The son runs off to explore and ends up tripping over a woman's foot that is sticking out of the sand. He races back to his mother, who immediately goes to her landlord. Her landlord, Mr. Lamb, heads down to the beach and begins to dig away, slowly revealing a woman's body. 13-year-old boy William races to get the police. When they arrive, they discover a heavy ironstone brick nearby covered in blood and 2 rusty shovels. A few days later, Ada, the landlady, is reading the newspapers and sees the story about a woman's body being found on the beach. Worried that this might be Irene Munro, she heads to police. They escort her to the medical office, where she positively identifies the body of Irene Munro. 1 day later, Irene's aunt travels down to formally identify her. So what had happened? On the day Irene went missing, 5 men who were working on the railway lines positively identified Irene. They saw her with 2 other men walking down the train tracks. All of them seemed happy, and one man had his arm around Irene's waist. He was also carrying a walking stick. Irene and these 2 unidentified men were heading towards the beach. A post-mortem revealed that Irene had suffered a blow to the head, probably caused by a stick. This had knocked her unconscious, and then a further attack with a heavy brick caused her death. There was no evidence of any other assault, including sexual. On the morning of the 19th of August, Irene encountered 2 men, Jack Field, aged 19, and William Gray, aged 29. They were local men and began just casually chatting with Irene. They offered to show her around that afternoon, and Irene agreed. Irene returned to her lodgings briefly in the afternoon and then left to meet up with Jack and William, these men she had just met. The 3 of them walked until they reached a secluded part of the beach known as the Crumbles. Irene exclaimed she was tired and pulled out a handkerchief from her bag and proceeded to dab her face with it. It was in this moment that the 2 men begin their attack. Jack raises his walking stick while William tries to grab her handbag. Irene is shocked, but she is unwilling to let go. She screams at William to stop. Jack then strikes Irene across the face with the metal part of his walking stick. He uses such force that it dislodges 2 of her teeth. Irene falls backwards and is now screaming in pain. William and Jack are panicking. Someone is going to hear this commotion. Jack turns to William and says, "For God's sake, do something." William, panicked, grabs the nearest thing he can find, which is a heavy ironstone brick weighing about 30 pounds. With this 30-pound brick, he begins to bludgeon Irene over the head and face. Irene is not dead, however, and it is believed she lives for a further 30 minutes in probably excruciating pain and just bleeding to death before succumbing to her injuries. In this time, William and Jack proceed to rob her. They take the rings off her fingers, the money out of her purse, and they begin to dig a 4-foot grave in the sand to bury Irene's body in. After this, William and Jack go to a local well-known hotel. They go up to the bar and start buying everyone drinks, including the barmaids, using the money from Irene's purse. They are showing no remorse whatsoever. They are out having a good time and also just paying off some of the debts that they owe people around town. Once the news broke, William and Jack tried to re-enlist themselves in the army in order to get away. This doesn't work and the trail quickly leads to William and Jack. The police talked to the local barmaids who said they'd seen William and Jack early in the afternoon on the 19th of August. One of the barmaids, Dorothy, recalls that when they left, William stated, "Wait until the evening, we will have more money then." They returned that evening and were suddenly flush with cash. Dorothy noted that William's hands were filthy dirty, to which he claimed that Jack had pushed him into the sea a few hours previously. On the 24th of August, both men were arrested. They denied even speaking to Irene. They said they didn't even know who she was. Their statements matched. They both said that they were out with a young servant girl called Hilda Baxter. Although the 5 men working down the railway tracks could identify Irene, they couldn't pick out William and Jack in a lineup. So William and Jack were actually released. At this point in time, the police did not have enough evidence to pin them to this crime. However, more witnesses came forward, including William Putland, the naval worker who saw Irene on the beach in that bright green coat. Also, Hilda Baxter, the young woman who William and Jack were meant to have spent the whole day with, denied seeing them that day. She said she was at work. In fact, when this went to court, she testified for the prosecution, saying that she barely knew the 2 of those men, and that the next day they tried to coerce her into providing a false alibi for them. With new witnesses and their alibi not checking out, William and Jack were rearrested and charged with murder on the 4th of September 1920. They both pled not guilty. The trial lasted 5 days and the jury took 1 hour to come back with a verdict of guilty. The jury did ask for mercy for both defendants as they did not believe that it was a premeditated attack. Both men received the death penalty, and upon hearing the verdict, they went pale, with Jack audibly gasping and having to grab the handrail to stop himself from collapsing. The motive for this murder is believed to be financial. Both men had been unemployed for a while, having been discharged from the army. They tried to appeal the verdict, blaming each other, but this was dismissed. Both men were executed via hanging on the 4th of February 1921. Just 4 years later, 37-year-old Emily Kaye is holidaying in the Crumbles when she is brutally murdered and dismembered. Patrick Mayon was a respected member of society. He was a bookkeeper, church worker, and a Sunday school teacher. He married his childhood sweetheart Jessie, and they had 2 children together. However, Patrick quickly became bored of this middle-class life and began delving into a life of crime. He started stealing from his employers, he burgled the home of a clergyman and subsequently abandoned his wife and children. He ran off with a new lover to the Isle of Man. However, this whirlwind romance didn't last long and he came crawling back with his tail between his legs. His wife accepted his apology and welcomed him back, and the police simply gave him a caution. However, once again, Patrick couldn't resist temptation and he ended up stealing from his employers again. This time he got a jail sentence. When he was released, he then developed a gambling habit, and in order to fund this, he turned to robbery and attempted murder. In 1916, Patrick targeted a wealthy household, not realizing that one of the servant girls was about to arrive for work. When she did, she spotted Patrick trying to burgle her employers. Panicked, Patrick struck her over the head 9 times with a hammer. As she was becoming unconscious, Patrick was frantically asking her, "Where are the keys for the safe?" When she finally came back round, she found herself in the tight embrace of her attacker, and he was begging, pleading her for forgiveness. Patrick received 5 years in prison for the assault, with the judge stating that the only thing that saved the poor girl was that she had such a generous head of hair. In 1919, when Patrick is released, he returns to work, and this is where he meets Emily Kaye. 37-year-old Emily Kaye was tall, incredibly clever, but also very shy. When she was only 17, she lost both her parents and 3 siblings, leaving just her and her sister. Between them, they inherited the family wealth. Emily eventually moved to London, and she was a very independent woman. She always had a job. She could take care of herself, which was very rare in the 1920s. Based on her age, she was deemed a spinster, and some people did look down on her. This all changed, however, when she started up a relationship and an affair with Patrick Mahon. Patrick had many affairs whilst being married to his supposed childhood sweetheart, Jessie. Emily knew that Patrick was married. However, Patrick created this kind of story that it was an unhappy marriage. They didn't see each other very often. They were practically separated. So Emily believed that she'd finally found the one. 3 months into the affair, Emily discovers that she is pregnant, and Patrick buys her this gorgeous diamond sapphire engagement ring. He says he's going to leave his wife, that they're going to start a new life together. They made plans and set a date for the wedding, after which they had this exciting idea to move to South Africa together. Emily withdrew a large amount of her savings and gave the majority of it to Patrick. He then travelled to the Crumbles, located in the quaint little village of Eastbourne, in order to secure a bungalow for him and his new fiancée to rent for the rest of the time that they plan to be in the UK. He secures a home in the Crumbles for nearly 2 months between April and June of 1924. Emily travels down, really excited. She is pregnant, she has a new man, she's going to get married, they're going to emigrate. She believes she's going to start this new exciting life with this man that she truly loves. Unbeknown to Emily, Patrick has already met another woman. Whilst trying to find this place to live in the Crumbles, he met and began courting a lady called Ethel Duncan. Emily arrives at the bungalow on the 12th of April, and Patrick also arrives that day. At Victoria train station on his way down, he purchases a 10-inch knife and a saw. The next thing we know is 4 days later, on the 17th of April, Patrick sends a telegram to Ethel Duncan inviting her to stay over at this house. She arrives and they have a brilliant 3 days together. Patrick seems to have just loads of money. They're going out for fancy dinners, seeing shows. Presumably, he is using the money that Emily gave him. Ethel also knew that Patrick was married, but he told the same story about how this was an unhappy marriage and they were basically separated. Ethel knew that another woman had been staying at that house. She saw women's shoes and some women's makeup. When she questioned Patrick, he said that it was his wife. She'd come to stay over the Easter with their children, but it was very platonic. Ethel was convinced by this. When Ethel arrived at Eastbourne, she noticed that Patrick's hand was like bandaged up. She asked what had happened, and he said that he saved a woman from falling from a bus. Ethel also spots a woman's trunk in one of the bedrooms, but again doesn't really think anything of it. Anyway, after spending this lovely time together, they both travel back to London and go their separate ways. During this period, Jessie, Patrick's wife, has become increasingly suspicious. His extended absences, frequent business trips, she thinks either he's having another affair or his gambling habit has returned. So she asks her friend, who is a detective, to look into it. Jessie gives him a left luggage ticket that she had found in Patrick's suit. He goes to the train station, hands over this ticket and receives a suitcase. This suitcase is locked, but he manages to peek in it. Inside, he spots a bloody knife and bloody women's underwear. He returns the suitcase, gives the ticket back to Jessie and tells her to put it back into Patrick's suit. He immediately informs Scotland Yard and they go to investigate this suitcase. They take a sample of the women's underwear for forensic analysis and confirm that it is human blood. They wait for Patrick to go and pick up this suitcase himself and then arrest him. When Patrick goes to collect this suitcase, he is immediately arrested and brought in for questioning. They open the suitcase in front of him and he states that, oh, all this blood is just from the raw meat I carry around to feed my dogs. The police are not convinced at all. There is bloody women's underwear in there. There is a very small women's bag with the initials EBK. And so they use the technique of just sitting in silence. They sit there for 30 minutes before Patrick finally gives in and begins confessing. He states that him and Emily were on holiday together. They began fighting because she wanted him to tell everyone that he was moving to South Africa. He refused and she got really angry. She threw an axe at him, which missed and hit one of the doors. They got into a scuffle and ended up falling over one of the deck chairs. As they were falling, Emily smashed her head really hard on some concrete and died. Patrick said he tried to resuscitate her but knew she had gone, so he decided that he was going to dismember her. Police travelled down to the Crumbles to search this bungalow and found that large trunk that Ethel had spotted. It also had the initials EBK on it, and when they opened it, they saw parts of Emily's body. Her heart and organs were found in a biscuit tin. In a pan on the stove were more parts that Patrick had boiled. Some body parts he had boiled he had then bagged up and just thrown out of the train window on his way back home to London. The home was full of blood, but there was no scuff mark on any door to suggest that an axe had hit it. There was no evidence to suggest that there was a scuffle or that someone had fallen. Emily's limbs, head and uterus were never found. Patrick admitted that he had burnt them in the fireplace, pulverised them and then scattered them around the bungalow garden. Police discovered a rusty and greasy saw with flesh still on it. There were numerous articles of blood-stained female clothing throughout the bungalow. There was also a saucer containing solid human fat found on the dining room floor. So although her uterus was never discovered, a post-mortem and medical examination of her breasts and one of her ovaries revealed that she was in the early stages of pregnancy at the time of her murder. So why would Patrick brutally murder his new fiancée and unborn child? It was believed that he really didn't want Jessie, his wife, to find out about his affair. And to be honest, he didn't want to settle down with anyone. He didn't want to settle down and have a child at all. There was also a financial motive to this. Emily had a relatively large amount of money through inheritance and working hard her entire life. She was very frugal, so had saved up quite a bit of money, which she subsequently gave to Patrick after their engagement, and then he just spent it having a great time with his new lover, Ethel. This case interestingly changed the way that forensics were handled. Before this case, police didn't even use gloves when handling evidence. They were literally just picking up Emily's heart in their bare hands and then bagging it. This case was so gruesome and bloody that it called for a forensic kit to be given out to police, which then included gloves. Patrick was found guilty and sentenced to death. He was hung in September of 1924. It is said that when he was hung, he tried to prevent his death by trying to jump clear of the trap. He really did not want to die. So this was the case of the Crumbles murders, two very unrelated cases that happened within a close period of time in a very sleepy town in the south coast of England. My name's Emma, this has been Tiki Bar True Crimes. If you like my content, please remember to like, subscribe and comment, and I'll see you in the next one.